The lawyer placed a folder on my kitchen table and looked at me like I was already guilty. "My client believes you have an obligation to share your inheritance with the Carter family," he said. Across from him, my mother-in-law smiled. It was the same smile she had worn at my wedding 6 days earlier. Polite, elegant, almost affectionate. Now it looked different. I glanced at the folder, then at Evelyn Carter. "You came to my house with a lawyer," I said quietly, "to ask me for money." She crossed her arms. "Not just money, Claire, family money." My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed steady, because there was something neither of them knew. They had no idea how much money I actually had, and they certainly didn't know what my father had instructed me to do, if anyone ever came asking. "My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 32 years old, a captain in the United States Army, and until that morning, I had been trying to convince myself that marrying Michael Carter had been the right decision. 6 days earlier, I had stood beside him in a small church outside Washington, D.C., surrounded by family friends and a handful of people from my military life. My father wasn't there. General Daniel Morgan had been gone for 11 months. He had been a 4-star general before retirement, a man who had spent more than 4 decades serving his country. To most people, he was disciplined, intimidating, and impossible to impress. To me, he was simply Dad. He had taught me how to fold a uniform properly, how to keep my word when nobody was watching, and how to stay calm when everyone else was losing their heads. But there was one lesson he repeated more than any other: never tell people what you have until you know what they value. I had never fully understood what he meant until my wedding. Michael knew my father had left me an inheritance. He knew there were investments and property involved. I had told him that Dad had arranged things before he died, but I never told him the number, not even once. The number was $68 million. It wasn't money I believed made me better than anyone else. It was the result of decades of investments, family holdings, and assets my father had carefully protected. The inheritance was held in a trust structured by attorneys my father had known for years, and Dad had left very specific instructions. The money was mine, not Michael's, not his mother's, not anyone else's. Mine. I had kept the amount secret because I wanted one simple answer. Would my future husband love me if I had nothing? For the first year we dated, Michael gave me every reason to believe the answer was yes. He never asked about my salary. He never complained about my military schedule. When I had to leave for training, he brought me coffee before dawn and told me he was proud of me. That was the man I thought I knew. His mother was different. Evelyn had always been gracious in public, but there was something calculating beneath her manners. She asked questions that sounded harmless. "What did your father do with his investments? Did he leave you the family home?" I always answered vaguely. Michael usually changed the subject. "So, when I married him, I thought the secret was safe." 6 days after our wedding, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when the doorbell rang. Evelyn stood outside. Besides her was a man in a dark suit carrying a leather briefcase. "Good morning, Claire," she said. I looked at the man. "My attorney." My stomach tightened. "Why?" "We need to discuss your inheritance." I stared at her. She sat at my kitchen table as if she owned the house. The attorney opened his briefcase. "I'll be direct," he said. "Your marriage creates certain financial considerations, not where my inheritance is concerned." Evelyn leaned toward me. "Your father was a powerful man. He understood family obligations." I almost laughed. "My father understood boundaries." Her expression hardened. "Claire, Michael is your husband now. What belongs to you belongs to the family you married into." "No," I said. "That's not how inheritance works." The attorney slid a document toward me. "There's a proposed financial agreement here. It would establish shared access to certain inherited assets." I didn't touch it. Instead, I looked at the top page. There were details about my trust. Details that only a handful of people should have known. My mouth went dry. "How did you get this information?" Neither of them answered. I looked at Evelyn. Then I looked at the attorney. Finally, I asked the question that mattered. "Did Michael tell you?" Evelyn smiled again. That same wedding smile. "Michael doesn't need to tell me everything," she said. A cold feeling moved through me. I reached for my phone. I called my husband. He answered after the third ring. "Hey, Claire." "Michael, I said your mother is here with a lawyer." Silence. Not surprise, not confusion, silence. Then he whispered, "What?" I closed my eyes. "She's asking me to sign documents about my inheritance." Another silence. Longer this time. And in that silence, I realized something that hurt more than the lawyer, more than the documents, and more than Evelyn's entitlement. Michael knew something. Maybe not everything, but something. "Claire," he finally said, "maybe we should talk about this when I get home." I looked at the woman sitting across from me. Evelyn was watching my face carefully. She already knew. She had come prepared. And suddenly, my father's final warning came back to me with painful clarity. Never react when you're angry. Never reveal what you know. And above all, never show your enemy the full battlefield. I opened my eyes. "Okay," I told Michael. "We'll talk when you get home." Then I hung up. For the first time since my wedding, I wasn't thinking like a newlywed. I was thinking like my father's daughter, and I knew the next move mattered. By the time Michael came home that evening, Evelyn and her attorney were gone. I had spent the afternoon sitting at the kitchen table with the document spread out in front of me, reading every page without signing a single line. The more I read, the worse it became. The agreement wasn't simply asking me to share my inheritance. It would have given Michael access to financial information, created joint control over certain assets, and opened the door for his family to argue that the money should be used for household and family obligations. It was written in polite legal language, but I knew exactly what it meant. Once I signed it, getting that control back would be difficult. I heard the garage door open around 7 Lither. A few seconds later, Michael walked into the kitchen. He looked tired or guilty. I couldn't tell which. He set his keys on the counter and looked at me. "Where's my mom gone? And the lawyer gone too?" He nodded slowly. I watched him remove his jacket. "You knew they were coming." He stopped. "I knew my mom wanted to talk to you. That wasn't my question." He looked down. "I knew she was upset." "Michael." He finally looked at me. "Yes." The word was quiet, but it landed heavily. I pushed the documents across the table. "She brought this." He didn't touch them. I didn't know she'd bring a lawyer. "But you knew she was going to ask about my inheritance." He hesitated. "Yes." I leaned back in my chair. For a moment I couldn't find the right words. Not because I was surprised, because I was disappointed. "When did you find out?" "A few weeks ago." My chest tightened. "A few weeks?" He nodded. "How?" "My mother heard something from one of your father's old business associates." I stared at him. "That makes no sense." "Why?" "Because the amount was confidential." He looked away. That tiny movement told me more than his answer could have. "You knew the amount, didn't you? You knew it was substantial." "I knew your father had left you money." "How much?" Michael didn't answer. I stood. "How much did you know?" "Claire?" "I don't remember." I almost smiled. "You don't remember hearing about $68 million? His face changed. There it was. The reaction I'd been waiting for. He knew, maybe not every detail, but he knew the number. And suddenly, the last few weeks of our marriage looked different. The questions about my father's estate, the strange conversation he'd started about buying a bigger house, the way his mother had recently asked whether I planned to continue serving in the army after we started a family. At the time I had thought they were normal questions. Now they felt like pieces of a puzzle. "Did you tell your mother the amount?" "No." "Did you tell her anything?" Michael rubbed his forehead. "I might have mentioned that your father left you more than we expected." I closed my eyes. More than we expected. Those words bothered me. Because he had just turned my inheritance into something that belonged to both of us. We. He looked at me. "What you said we expected." "I didn't mean it that way." "How did you mean it?" He couldn't answer. I walked toward the window. Outside, our quiet suburban street looked completely ordinary. A neighbor was bringing groceries inside. A couple walked their dog. A teenager was shooting basketballs in a driveway. Nothing had changed except everything had changed. "I never told you the amount," I said. "I know." "Why didn't you ask?" "Because I didn't care." I turned around. "Then why is your mother asking me to sign a document giving you access to it?" He looked ashamed. "I didn't ask her to do that." "But you didn't stop her." He sat down. For the first time I saw fear in his expression. "Claire, my family is struggling." I said nothing. "My parents have debts. My mother thinks your inheritance could solve everything." "Could she thinks families help each other?" "That's not what this is." "I know." "No, Michael, you don't." My voice remained calm, but I could feel the anger underneath it. Your mother didn't come here because she wanted to welcome me into the family. She came here 6 days after our wedding with a lawyer and information about my private trust. He looked down. I know. Do you? Yes. Then tell me how she got it. He was silent. That silence lasted long enough for me to understand that he either knew or had a very good idea. I sat across from him. Michael, I need the truth. Not the version that makes your family look better. He swallowed. My mother has been asking questions. What kind of questions about your father's estate? When? Before the wedding, my heart sank. How long? Maybe 2 months. 2 months? While I had been choosing flowers, arranging seating, and trying to balance my military schedule with wedding preparations, his mother had been investigating my inheritance. Did you know? At first I thought she was just curious, and later I realized she wasn't. What did you do? He looked at me. I told her to leave it alone. Did she know? I stood again. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid. That answer stopped me. Afraid of what? Losing you. I looked at him for several seconds. You should have been more afraid of losing my trust. He lowered his eyes. That night I didn't sleep beside him. I took a blanket to the guest room and closed the door, but instead of crying, I did something my father had taught me during my first year as an officer. I separated facts from feelings. Fact 1, Michael knew about the inheritance. Fact 2, his mother knew the amount. Fact 3, a lawyer had prepared documents. Fact 4, someone had obtained confidential information about my trust. And fact 5, Michael was not telling me everything. The next morning I called my father's estate attorney, Robert Hayes. Robert had represented my father for nearly 15 years. He was one of the few people I trusted completely. When he answered, I didn't waste time. Robert, someone has information about my trust. There was a pause. What kind of information? The amount, the structure, details about the assets. His voice became serious. Did you disclose anything to your husband? No. Then, we have a problem. I thought so. Claire, I need you to come to my office. I drove into Washington that morning. Robert's office was in an older brick building, where my father had spent countless hours reviewing contracts and estate documents. He closed the blinds before speaking. Someone attempted to access your trust records last month. I stared at him. Who? We don't know for certain. Then how did you know it was an attempt? Because the request came through a third party using information connected to your husband. My stomach dropped. Michael? We can't say he personally made the request, but someone used his information. Yes. Robert opened a file. Then he removed a sealed envelope. This was left by your father. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My father's handwriting. Robert looked at me. He gave me strict instructions. I was not to deliver this, unless someone attempted to interfere with your inheritance. My fingers trembled as I reached for the envelope. What does it say? Robert's expression softened. I think your father expected this day might come. I looked down at the seal. 11 months I had avoided opening anything that made his death feel real, but now, holding that envelope, I understood. My father had not simply left me money. He had left me a warning. And whatever was inside that letter could change everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I broke the seal with my thumb. For a few seconds, I couldn't bring myself to unfold the paper. My father's handwriting was unmistakable. Strong letters, slightly slanted, precise. The same handwriting I had seen on birthday cards, military commendations, and handwritten notes he'd left on my kitchen counter. I finally opened the letter. My eyes landed on the first line. Claire, if you're reading this, someone has tried to get access to what I left you. I stopped breathing. Robert quietly closed the office door. I continued reading. Do not confront them until you understand what they're trying to accomplish. My father knew me too well. He knew I would want answers immediately. He knew I would want to call Michael, confront Evelyn, and demand an explanation. Instead, he was telling me to wait, to observe, to think. I kept reading. The money is not the important part. The people who reveal themselves because of it are. My vision blurred. I had heard those words in different forms my entire life. Dad never cared much about money. He cared about character. He had grown up in a working-class family in Pennsylvania, long before anyone called him General Morgan. He used to tell me that his first military paycheck felt enormous because, at 19, He had never had much money of his own. He believed money should give you freedom to make good decisions, not permission to make careless ones. The letter continued. I chose you as the sole beneficiary because you have demonstrated something I cannot buy or teach with money restraint. I swallowed hard. Then came the sentence that made my hands tremble. If someone attempts to convince you that marriage automatically gives them control over this inheritance, remember that inheritance and marital property are not the same thing. Get independent legal advice before signing anything. I looked up at Robert. He knew. Robert nodded. He knew there might be a problem. He was concerned about people around you. Who? Robert hesitated. Your father never gave me a name. I looked back at the letter. There was more. I have also asked Robert to preserve records concerning several financial inquiries made by people connected to individuals who may eventually approach you. If that happens, don't assume the person standing in front of you is the person controlling the situation. I read that paragraph twice. Someone connected to individuals. Not one person. People. My stomach tightened. Then I reached the final paragraph. Claire, you will be tempted to think you can solve this by giving them enough money to make the problem disappear. Don't. Once you pay someone who believes they are entitled to you, there will always be another demand. I folded the letter slowly. For the first time since my father's death, I cried. Not because I was afraid, because I missed him. I missed the certainty of having someone older and wiser in the room. Someone who could look at a complicated situation and reduce it to one clear question. What is right? Robert handed me a tissue. He loved you very much, I know. He was proud of you. I wiped my eyes. I just wish he'd told me more. Robert smiled sadly. He probably thought he had. That sounded exactly like my father. I took a breath. Show me the records. Robert opened another folder. Inside were copies of several inquiries made about my trust. One had been submitted through a financial consultant. Another had come from an attorney's office. The third had been made through a property company. And attached to the third request was a name. Carter Family Holdings. I stared at it. That's Evelyn's family. Robert nodded. Your mother-in-law's husband owned several commercial properties. The company has been struggling. How badly? Robert slid another document toward me. I read the numbers. Millions in debt, outstanding loans, tax liens, a pending foreclosure on one property. I looked up. How long has this been going on? Several years. I felt something inside me go cold. Michael had never told me, neither had Evelyn. Robert continued, there is something else. He handed me a printed email. The message was between two people I didn't recognize. The subject line read, Claire Morgan Marriage and Trust. I read it. The writer discussed the possibility of convincing me to combine my inherited assets with marital finances after the wedding. One sentence stood out. Once she's married, she'll be more emotionally vulnerable to pressure from her husband. My hands went numb. Who wrote this? We're still investigating. Does Michael know about it? I don't know. I closed my eyes. I wanted to believe he didn't. I desperately wanted to believe that, because despite everything, I still loved him. That was the most painful part. If I hated him, this would have been easier, but I didn't. I loved the man who had waited outside the airport for me after a deployment away. I loved the man who had once told me that my uniform was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen me wear. I loved the man I thought he was. And now, I didn't know whether that man had ever really existed. I drove home that afternoon without calling him. When I walked through the front door, Michael was sitting on the couch. He stood immediately. Where were you? At my attorney's office. His face tightened. Why? Because your mother brought a lawyer into our home, I know. No, you don't. I placed my purse on the table. I know about the financial inquiries. His expression changed. What inquiries? Don't. I had never spoken to him that way before. He stopped. Claire, did you or your mother try to access my trust? No. Did you give anyone information about my inheritance? No. Did you know your family has millions in debt? He stared at me. Who told you that? That wasn't an answer. I felt something break inside me. You did know. I knew about my parents' financial problems, and you still let your mother come here asking for my money. I didn't know what she planned to do. You knew enough. He ran both hands through his hair. I was trying to protect everyone except me. He looked wounded. That isn't fair, neither was what happened. He stepped closer. I love you. I wanted to believe him, but love wasn't enough anymore. Then tell me the truth. He looked down. My mother has been talking about your inheritance for weeks. How much does she want? He didn't answer. How much? Enough to pay off the family debt. I stared at him. That's millions of dollars. I know, and she expects me to give it to her. She thinks you should help. I shook my head. No, she thinks you should help her convince me. Michael said nothing. That silence was my answer. I walked past him. Where are you going? To the guest room. Claire, I stopped at the hallway. I don't know if our marriage can survive this. His face fell. But I know one thing. I turned around. I'm not giving your family $1. That night, I placed my father's letter in the drawer beside my bed. Then I read it one more time. The final sentence stayed with me. Don't confuse forgiveness with surrender. I realized my father hadn't left me a weapon. He had left me something better, a warning. And now, for the first time, I was ready to find out exactly who had planned to take what he left me. The next morning, before sunrise. That had always been normal for me. Years in the army had trained my body to wake before the alarm, before the neighborhood came alive, before the first commuter cars filled the streets. But that morning felt different. I wasn't waking up for duty. I was waking up because I finally understood that I was in the middle of a battle I had never agreed to fight. I made coffee, put my hair into a tight bun, and sat at the kitchen table with my father's letter beside me. Then I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Evelyn, not yet. I wasn't going to accuse Michael, not yet. I was going to let them believe I was confused. My father had taught me something during my first leadership course. When you don't understand the enemy's objective, he had told me, don't rush forward, give them room to reveal it. So I did exactly that. At 9 that morning, I called Evelyn. She answered almost immediately. Claire, her voice sounded pleasant, almost relieved. I've been thinking about yesterday, I said. I knew you would. I don't want there to be conflict between us. That makes 2 of us. I almost laughed. Instead, I said, maybe we should meet. There was a brief pause. I'd like that. Lunch? Of course. We met at a quiet restaurant in Bethesda. Evelyn arrived wearing a cream-colored jacket, pearl earrings, and the expression of a woman who believed she had already won. She hugged me when she saw me. I allowed it. I'm glad you're being reasonable, she said. I smiled politely. I've had time to think. She sat across from me. You're young, Claire. You don't understand how complicated marriage can become when money is involved. I understand that. Michael is your husband. I know. And your inheritance is substantial. I looked directly at her. How substantial? She smiled. Your father was a very successful man. That isn't what I asked. She leaned closer. $68 million. Dollars. My heart sank. Not because she knew, because she said the exact number. I had never told Michael. I had never told anyone in his family. I folded my hands beneath the table so she wouldn't see my fingers tighten. How did you find out? Evelyn shrugged. People talk. About private trusts, Claire, don't be naive. There it was. The arrogance, the assumption that because she was older, wealthier, and more socially connected, she could talk around the truth. She reached into her purse. I brought something. She placed another document on the table. This is a reasonable arrangement. I didn't touch it. What does it do? It gives Michael authority to manage certain investments. Why? Because as military officer, your career is demanding. I almost smiled. So you think my career makes me incapable of managing my own money? That's not what I said. You implied it, she sighed. I'm trying to protect my son. From what? From being financially excluded from his own marriage. I stared at her. My inheritance existed before I married him. That doesn't mean it shouldn't benefit your husband. Shouldn't it be my decision? She looked irritated. Marriage isn't a business transaction. No, I said quietly. Which is why I'm surprised you're asking me to sign a financial agreement 6 days after my wedding. Her expression hardened. You're making this difficult. No, I'm asking questions, she leaned back. Your father didn't raise you to be selfish. That sentence hit differently. For a moment, I felt anger rise in my chest. Then I remembered his letter. Don't react. I smiled. You're right. She looked pleased. I knew you'd understand. I do understand. I pushed the document back toward her. I understand exactly what you're asking. Her smile disappeared. I won't sign it. She stared at me. Claire, I won't sign anything that gives your family control over my inheritance. You're making a serious mistake, maybe. I stood, but it's my mistake to make. I left before she could respond. That afternoon I met Robert again. I gave him the document. He read it carefully. This is worse than the first version. How? This one contains language that could create arguments about control over inherited assets if you later use them for joint purchases. So, they want me to sign something before they know whether I'll agree to anything else. Exactly. I sat back. Can we prove they planned this before the wedding? We may be able to. He opened another file. We found something. He handed me printed emails. One was from Evelyn to Michael. The date was 3 weeks before our wedding. Once you're married, she'll have a harder time saying no. Don't pressure her before the ceremony. I stared at the sentence, then another message. She trusts you. Use that. I couldn't breathe for a moment. I read it again, then again. Michael had received those messages, and he hadn't shown them to me. Did he respond? Robert nodded. He pointed to the next page. Michael had written, I don't want to hurt her. Evelyn replied, you're not hurting her. You're securing your family's future. I closed my eyes. For one brief moment, I wanted to believe that Michael's message meant he had tried to resist. Then I saw the final response. I'll talk to her after the wedding. My stomach turned. The wedding. The moment when I had stood beside him and promised to love him. The moment when my father had been absent because he was already gone. The moment I had believed I was beginning a new family. They had been planning something behind my back before I even walked down the aisle. I looked at Robert. What do I do? Protect yourself legally. And Michael? That depends on whether he continues cooperating with his mother. I nodded. That evening I went home and found Michael waiting in the living room. He looked exhausted. My mother called me, he said. I know. She told me you refused. I did. He sat down. Claire, please. I remained standing. Did you know about the emails? His face went pale. What emails? Don't lie to me. He stared at the floor. I placed copies on the coffee table. He looked at them. His shoulders dropped. I was going to tell you. When? After we settled down. After you got me to sign? No, then? When he couldn't answer. I felt tears forming, but I refused to let them fall. You let your mother plan this before our wedding. I didn't agree with everything she wanted, but you agreed to wait until after the wedding. He covered his face. I was scared. Of what? Of losing my family. I nodded slowly. And you thought you could risk losing me instead? He looked up. I love you. I believe you. He looked surprised. But love without courage isn't enough. The room went silent. I picked up my father's letter from the table. My father warned me that people might reveal themselves because of this money. Michael stared at it. I never wanted your money. Then prove it. How? Tell your mother no. He looked terrified. I had my answer. That night I moved my father's letter into a locked drawer. Then I contacted my attorney and asked him to begin formal steps to protect every asset my father had left me. I wasn't filing for divorce, not yet. I wasn't destroying my marriage, not yet. But I was done pretending this was a misunderstanding. If Evelyn wanted to fight over my inheritance, she had chosen the wrong woman. Because I wasn't going to fight her with anger. I was going to fight her with facts. And the next document we uncovered would prove that the plan against me was much bigger than I had imagined. The document arrived on a Tuesday morning. Robert called me while I was getting ready for work. Claire, I need you to come in. His voice was different, not frightened, serious. What happened? We found something connected to Michael. I was silent for a moment. I'm coming. I drove into Washington through the morning traffic, my mind running through every possibility. By then, I had stopped expecting good news. Still, I wasn't prepared for what Robert placed on his desk. It was a financial agreement. Not the one Evelyn had brought to my house. Not the one she had tried to get me to sign at lunch. This was something different. It was an internal agreement between Michael and a company called Carter Family Holdings. I read the first page, then the second. My hands began to shake. What is this? Robert folded his hands. Your husband's family owns several commercial properties. They've been carrying significant debt for years. I know. This agreement was prepared before your wedding. I looked at him. What does it say? Robert pointed to a section near the bottom. It outlines how certain debts would be paid if additional capital became available to the family. I kept reading. Then I saw my name. Not as a beneficiary, not as an owner, as a potential source of funds. My stomach turned. They planned to use my inheritance to pay these debts. Robert nodded. That's what it appears to show. I looked at the date, 3 weeks before my wedding. 3 weeks before Michael stood beside me and promised to build a life together. Before I put a ring on his finger. Before I told him I loved him. They had already discussed my money. I pushed the document away. Does Michael's signature appear here? Robert didn't answer immediately. Yes. I closed my eyes. For a few seconds the office disappeared. I was back at the church. I could hear the music. I could see Michael waiting for me. I remembered the way he smiled when he saw me. I remembered thinking, this is the man I can trust. Then I opened my eyes. Can we prove this was connected to my inheritance? We can prove the agreement existed, but not that Michael intended to force me. No. I nodded. That matters. It does. I sat quietly. I wasn't interested in destroying someone simply because I was hurt. I wanted the truth, and I wanted to protect myself. That afternoon I went home. Michael was there. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. When he saw me, he stood. Claire. I placed the agreement on the table. He looked at it. His face changed immediately. Where did you get that? Your family records. He stared at the document. You weren't supposed to see that. I felt something inside me go completely still. That's your first response? He closed his eyes. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? I was going to tell you. He sat down. I remained, standing. Did you sign this? Sign this? Yes. The word was barely audible. I nodded. Why? My mother pressured me. You're a grown man, I know. You had a choice. I know. Then why? He looked at me because I thought if I didn't help my parents would lose everything, and you thought I should pay for it. No, but that's what the agreement says. I never expected you to actually give us $68 million. I stared at him. Then what did you expect? He swallowed. Maybe a few million. The words hit me harder than a shout. A few million, as if it were nothing, as if the money had no meaning because my father had earned it, as if my life had suddenly become a bank account. I sat across from him. How much did your mother tell you she needed? About 4 million? And how much did she expect to get from me? I don't know. You signed an agreement without knowing. Knowing? He looked away. I nodded slowly. That's the problem, Michael. He looked back. You weren't just manipulated by your mother. You participated. Tears filled his eyes. I know. For the first time, he didn't defend himself. He didn't blame Evelyn. He didn't tell me I was overreacting. He simply sat there. And somehow that made the betrayal feel more real. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. It's my mother. Answer it. He hesitated. Put it on speaker. He looked nervous, but he answered. Mom, Evelyn's voice came through immediately. Did she sign? Michael looked at me. No. There was a pause. Then Evelyn said something that made my blood run cold. Then you need to make her understand what happens if she doesn't cooperate. I reached for the phone. I'm listening. Silence. Claire. Yes. Her voice changed. You shouldn't be listening to private family conversations. You called my husband about my money. Because you're being unreasonable. No, I'm being careful. You don't understand what your father would have wanted. That sentence made me angry. You didn't know my father. I knew his reputation. You knew nothing about him. She became defensive. Your father was a powerful man. He understood that families support one another. My father also believed people should earn what they receive. She hung up. Michael stared at the phone. I looked at him. That's the last time she uses you to speak to me. He nodded. I know. No, you need to decide something. What, your mother or our marriage? His face crumpled. Claire, I am not asking you to abandon your family. Then what are you asking? I'm asking you to stop allowing your family to use our marriage as a financial strategy. He sat quietly for a long time. Finally, he said, I'll tell her no. I wanted to believe him, but words weren't enough anymore. The following week, our attorneys arranged mediation. Evelyn arrived with her lawyer. Michael arrived alone. That small detail told me something had changed. The mediator explained that the purpose wasn't to determine ownership of my inheritance. That was already clear. The purpose was to resolve the financial dispute and establish boundaries. Evelyn immediately accused me turning her son against her. I didn't respond. Robert placed the documents on the table. Bank records, emails, the financial agreement, the attempted trust inquiry. The mediator read everything carefully, then she looked at Evelyn. Mrs. Carter, why was this agreement prepared before the marriage? Evelyn shifted in her chair. It was simply a precaution. Why was Miss Morgan's inheritance referenced? She was going to become part of our family. The mediator looked at Michael. Did you sign this? Yes. Did your wife know about it before the wedding? No. The room became silent. Michael looked at me. I was wrong. I believed him. Not because of the words, because for the first time he was willing to say them in front of everyone. Evelyn's expression hardened. This is ridiculous. She has $68 million and you're all acting as though she is the victim. I looked at her. I never asked you for anything. She opened her mouth. I continued. I didn't take your house. I didn't take your business. I didn't take your son's money. I paused. You came after mine. No one spoke. And in that silence, I finally understood what my father had meant. The money hadn't changed anyone. It had simply removed the mask. Months later, I realized the hardest part had not been protecting the $68 million. It had been deciding what to do with the people who had tried to take it. The mediation ended without Evelyn receiving a dollar. My inheritance remained legally separate, exactly as my father's estate plan intended. The Carter family's debts remained their responsibility, and Michael formally withdrew from the agreement he had signed before our wedding. But legal victory did not make everything feel better. Michael understood that I couldn't answer them quickly. He moved into a small apartment about 20 minutes from our house. We were still married, but separated. He didn't demand that I come back. He didn't ask me for money, and perhaps most importantly, he stopped making excuses for his mother. A few weeks after the mediation, Michael called me. What is it? My mother wants me to challenge the trust. Are you going to? No, I told her I'm done. I sat quietly. Why are you telling me? Because I should have told you everything before. His voice cracked. I was afraid of my mother. I spent my whole life trying to keep her happy. I thought if I kept everyone calm, somehow nobody would get hurt. Someone did get hurt. I know. I'm sorry. I appreciate you saying that, I told him. But we're not going back to normal, I understand. And if we ever have a future, it has to be different. It will be. Over the next several months, I watched. Michael separated his finances from his parents. He refused to co-sign another loan for his family. He told Evelyn that my inheritance was not available to them. When she became angry, he didn't call me to mediate. He handled it himself. Meanwhile, I returned to my military duties. There was something comforting about putting on my uniform again. In the Army, responsibilities were clear. You were accountable for your decisions. One afternoon, Robert called me about a proposal. My father's estate could fund a charitable foundation supporting military families, veterans transitioning into civilian life, and families dealing with financial exploitation. My father had spent his life serving others. I didn't want his final legacy to be a number sitting quietly in an account. So, I created the Morgan Family Service Foundation. Part of the inheritance went towards scholarships for children of military families and financial education programs for young service members. One program focused specifically on estate planning, why couples should discuss money honestly, and most importantly, how to recognize financial manipulation. I learned something I wish someone had taught me earlier. Financial abuse doesn't always look like someone stealing your credit card. Sometimes it looks like a loving relative saying, "We're family." Sometimes it sounds like, "If you really loved us, you'd help." And sometimes it arrives wearing a suit and carrying a legal folder. A few months later, Michael and I agreed to attend counseling. During our first session, our counselor asked us a difficult question. Do you want to save your marriage, or do you simply want to stop feeling guilty about ending it? Neither of us answered immediately. Finally, I said I want to know whether we can build something honest. Michael nodded. So do I. We spent months learning how to talk about money without fear. We discussed boundaries, family expectations, our careers, and our future. But Michael kept showing up. He never asked me to forget what happened. He never said, "That was my mother, not me." Instead, he said, "I made my own choices." Evelyn never apologized. Eventually, she stopped contacting me directly. One autumn afternoon, almost a year after the day she first appeared at my door, I drove to Arlington National Cemetery. My father was buried there. I wore my dress uniform. The ceremony was quiet. Leaves moved across the grass in the cold wind. I stood beside his grave for a long time. Then I finally said, "Dad, you were right. The money didn't change people, it revealed them." But as I stood there, I realized something else. My father had taught me how to protect what he left me. Life had taught me something he couldn't teach me: how to decide who deserved another chance. I had spent months thinking revenge meant making Evelyn feel the pain she had caused me. It didn't. The greatest revenge was refusing to become bitter. I simply protected myself, told the truth, and walked away from manipulation. And I gave Michael the chance to prove that he could become a better man. Eventually, we renewed our vows. Before we exchanged rings, Michael looked at me. "I don't deserve another chance because I apologized," he said. "I only deserve it if I spend the rest of my life earning your trust." I smiled. "Then let's start there." When I placed the ring on his finger, I didn't feel like I was erasing the past. That was the real inheritance my father left me, not $68 million. He left me the courage to protect myself, the discipline to wait for the truth, and the wisdom to understand that forgiveness does not require surrender. If there is one thing I hope you take from my story, let it be this: protect what you've worked for, but don't let fear turn your heart into a fortress. Talk openly about money before marriage. Put important agreements in writing. Seek independent legal and financial advice when something feels wrong, and never let anyone convince you that saying no makes you selfish. Sometimes no is how you protect your future. Sometimes no is how you protect your family. And sometimes no is the first honest word you have spoken in years. My father thought he was leaving me $68 million, but in the end, he left me something worth far more. He taught me how to recognize character when money was on the table. And that lesson has stayed with me every day since. If this story touched something in you, take a moment to think about the people in your own life who have stood beside you when there was nothing to gain. If you know someone who needs this reminder about boundaries, trust, or protecting their future, share this story with them. And if you enjoy stories about courage, family, second chances, and finding strength after betrayal, consider subscribing and staying with me for the next story. Thank you for listening. Remember, protect your peace, value your character, and never confuse forgiveness with surrender. The phone rang less than an hour after I made one phone call. I hadn't called a lawyer. I hadn't called Ryan's mother to scream at her. I'd called my financial advisor and asked her to do something so quiet, so unremarkable on paper, that nobody would notice for days. But Patricia Lawson noticed in 58 minutes when I picked up. She wasn't using the voice she used at charity luncheons. She was using the voice of a woman who had just discovered the floor underneath her wasn't hers at all. Friday evenings used to mean something simple in my house. I'd drive home from the base, peel off 11 hours of discipline and decision-making, and walk into a kitchen that smelled like whatever Ryan had thrown together for dinner. That particular Friday dinner wasn't on the stove. Instead, there was a garment bag draped over the back of a kitchen chair, and through the clear plastic, I could see the charcoal wool of a tuxedo I didn't recognize. I set my bag down slowly. "New suit for the wedding," Ryan said, not looking up from his phone. I laughed. Actually laughed because for a second I thought I'd lost track of a date. "What time are we supposed to be there tomorrow?" He didn't answer right away. That was the first sign. Ryan is not a man who goes quiet before good news. "Haley." He finally set the phone down. "You're not on the list." I stood there with my keys still in my hand, waiting for the rest of the sentence, the part that would make it make sense. 8 years married to this man. Madison was his only sibling. His little sister, the one I'd helped move into her first apartment. The one I'd sat with in an ER waiting room. The night she thought she'd broken her wrist skateboarding, at 24, like it was still college. I could not believe I had simply been left off a guest list by accident. "What list?" I said carefully. "The wedding list." Mom finalized the seating and he started again. "It's not a big deal, it's just Ryan." My voice came out flatter than I meant it to the tone I use when a subordinate is stalling on a report. Why am I not invited to your sister's wedding? He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I'd watched him make 100 times before delivering bad news to his mother. Never to me. Mom doesn't want you there. The kitchen felt very quiet then. Somewhere down the hall, the refrigerator hummed. I could hear my own pulse. Why? He looked at the floor. When he finally spoke, it wasn't in his own words. I could hear Patricia's voice sitting inside his mouth like a ventriloquist's hand. She doesn't want a soldier like you there. She thinks you'll make people uncomfortable. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Not because I was searching for a comeback. Because I was doing math. Not the kind of math you do with a calculator, the kind you do with your whole life. 7 days earlier, I had wired the final payment that cleared the remaining balance on Patricia Lawson's mortgage. A number with 5 figures behind the decimal that most people don't say out loud in polite company. Patricia had called it in a text message she sent to a group chat that included her book club. A little help from Ryan and Haley. Ryan hadn't put in $1. I know this because I am the one who moved the money, and now his mother didn't want a soldier like me standing anywhere near the photographs. This was not new information about Patricia, exactly. She'd spent 8 years finding polite ways to ask when I might find a more normal job. She introduced me at dinner parties as Ryan's wife. She's in the army, while Ryan got his full title in the name of his company. Once she'd asked me not to wear my uniform to a family gathering, because she didn't want the evening to look like a recruitment commercial. Madison had laughed. Ryan had laughed. I had let all of it slide off me, because I told myself that was what family did. You absorbed the small cruelties because the alternative was war. And I had enough of that in my professional life already. I am not a brand new private who flinches at every insult. I am a lieutenant colonel with almost 2 decades of service, a woman who has run logistics for operations. Most people at that dinner table couldn't spell, but I have never once used my rank to win an argument at a family table. I wasn't going to start that night either. I looked at Ryan, waiting for him to say something that would fix it, waiting for him to say, "That's insane, and I'm calling my mother right now." Instead, he said, "She's my sister." 4 words. That was the sentence that actually broke something, not the one about the soldier. "And you're still going," I said. It wasn't a question. "Haley, come on. I can't skip my own sister's wedding." "Understood," I said. He must have thought that meant the conversation was over, because he picked up the tuxedo and carried it upstairs like a man who'd successfully negotiated a difficult client call. I stood in the kitchen a while longer, listening to his footsteps fade, and then I picked up my phone. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call Patricia to demand an explanation, or Madison to ask if she'd fought for me, or even a friend to vent to. I called Elaine Porter, my financial advisor for the past 6 years. The woman who has watched every dollar I've ever earned move somewhere with a purpose. "Elaine," I said when she picked up, "I want to separate every voluntary payment I'm currently making for the Lawson family from my personal accounts effective immediately." She didn't ask why. She just asked how fast I wanted it done. "As fast as you can move," I told her. Less than an hour later, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't expected to see that night. Patricia Lawson. I looked at it for exactly 3 rings before I answered. And when I did, the voice on the other end didn't sound like a woman planning a wedding tomorrow. It sounded like a woman who had just watched the ground shift under a house she thought was permanently hers. "Haley," she said, breathless, almost shouting. "What did you do?" To understand why my hands weren't shaking when Patricia screamed at me over the phone, you have to go back 6 months to a Sunday afternoon when she called Ryan, crying about numbers she barely understood. Patricia's husband, Robert, had died the year before after a short illness that emptied their savings faster than anyone expected. From the outside, the house in Milan still looked like old money, the kind of colonial with white columns and a circular driveway that made new neighbors assume the Lawson had never worried about anything in their lives. From the inside, it was a different story. There was still a mortgage balance most people wouldn't guess existed behind that facade. Property taxes that climbed every year, insurance premiums, and a roof that needed work Robert had kept postponing. Patricia would not hear the word sell. "Your father built this family in this house," she told Ryan more than once in the tone she used when she wanted a conversation to be over before it started. Ryan wanted to help her. I want to be fair here because he did want to. He just didn't have it. Between his car payment, the credit card balances he never mentioned to his mother, and a lifestyle that always ran a little ahead of his actual salary, Ryan had built an image of success that was more expensive to maintain than the income behind it. I was in a different position, and not by luck. Long before I met Ryan, I had built a habit of saving aggressively, investing early, and living well below whatever I earned. I came into the marriage with a small condo. I later sold a modest inheritance from my father, and 8 years of an army salary I hadn't spent trying to impress anyone. None of that made me wealthy in any dramatic sense. It made me solvent, disciplined, and when Patricia's mortgage crisis became urgent, capable of writing a check that would have taken Ryan years to save. I want to be precise about what happened next, because it matters for everything that came after. I agreed to help Patricia once. I paid off the remaining balance on her mortgage in full. It was structured as exactly what it was: a gift. Finished, not a loan, not leverage, not something I could take back later, no matter how angry I got. I need you to understand that, because it's the reason nothing I did afterward was about the house itself. But the mortgage wasn't the only thing I was quietly covering. Over that year, I'd also been paying for chunks of her homeowner's insurance, some of her larger medical and maintenance bills, a meaningful portion of Madison's wedding costs. And more than once, I'd stepped in when Ryan overspent his own budget helping his mother temporarily. None of it was ever my legal obligation. All of it was, I told myself, what a daughter-in-law does when she has the means and the people she married in to need her. The insult came the week the mortgage finally cleared. I sent the final wire on a Tuesday afternoon between meetings. Patricia's response, sent to me directly, was 4 words long. Received. Thank Ryan for arranging it, as though he'd done anything but tell her the money would be there. That night, she posted a photo of the house to her social media. The white columns glowing gold in the evening light, captioned with something about how the Lawson family always takes care of its own. Ryan saw it. I saw it too, sitting beside him on the couch. He didn't say a word to correct her. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight and let it go the way I'd let go of 100 small things before it. Now on the phone with Patricia the night before her daughter's wedding, none of that felt like something I could keep letting go of. She wanted to know why several upcoming automatic payments were no longer pulling from my account. I kept my voice level, the way I would with a soldier who needed a directive delivered without heat. "I'm not taking back anything I've already given you," I said. "The mortgage is paid and it stays paid. I'm ending the voluntary support going forward. That's all this is." "The wedding is tomorrow," she said, like the timing itself was an argument. "I know," I said. "Apparently I'm not invited." There was a pause on the line long enough that I could hear her breathing, changed the sound of a woman doing the same math I'd done in my kitchen an hour earlier, except arriving at it far too late. "That money," she said, her voice climbing, "was for family." "Exactly," I said. I let the words sit there a moment before I finished it. "And yesterday you decided I wasn't family." People sometimes ask me how a person tolerates disrespect for 8 years without walking away. The honest answer is that it rarely arrives all at once. It arrives in small doses spaced out just far enough apart that you can convince yourself each one was an isolated incident, a bad mood, a joke that landed wrong. You don't realize you've been building a tolerance to something poisonous until the day the dose finally becomes lethal. I met Ryan at a mutual friend's barbecue back when I was a captain, and he was still climbing the ladder at a firm that sold him on the idea that appearances were half the job. What drew him to me, he told me early on, was that I didn't need anybody. I ran my own life, paid my own bills, made my own decisions without waiting for permission or approval. He said it like it was the most attractive thing about me. It took less than 2 years of marriage for that same quality to start irritating him, or more precisely, to start irritating his mother, which amounted to the same thing in our household. In the world Patricia built for her children, status wasn't measured in character or competence. It was measured in zip codes, in which country club you belonged to, in whose name was on the letterhead, in how a person's job sounded when you said it out loud at a dinner party. The army did not sound impressive to Patricia. It sounded like something you did when you hadn't been given better options. She never asked me a single real question about my work in 8 years. Not what my responsibilities were, not what a lieutenant colonel actually manages, not what it took to get there. She simply filed me under soldier the way you'd file a stranger's job under works retail, and moved on to a topic she found more interesting. The insults were rarely loud enough to be called insults. That was the design of them, I think, even if Patricia never consciously planned it that way. At a family dinner early in our marriage, she went around the table, introducing everyone by title and accomplishment. Ryan, business development, doing wonderfully at his firm, her late husband's old law partner, senior counsel. And then when she reached me, and this is Ryan's wife, she's in the army. No rank, no role, just a category. Delivered in the same tone she might have used for a hobby. Once, before a family gathering with people, Patricia wanted to impress. She asked me not to wear my uniform, even though I was coming straight from an event where it was required. "We don't want the evening looking like a recruitment commercial," she said, and Madison laughed from across the room. And Ryan laughed too, a half-second later, like he'd checked which way the wind was blowing before deciding it was safe. I didn't laugh. Didn't make a scene. I told myself the way I'd told myself so many times that this was simply who Patricia was, and that I hadn't married her. I'd married her son. The truth is, I kept giving because I understood what it meant to lose family early. My father died when I was in my 20s, before he ever got to see me commissioned. And something in me decided when I married Ryan that his mother and sister were mine now too, whether they'd chosen me back or not. I never thought of the money as something I was buying loyalty with. I thought I was simply doing what people who loved each other did when one of them had the means and the others needed help. But kindness that isn't recognized doesn't stay kindness forever. Eventually, it curdles into expectation, and expectation, given enough time and enough silence from the people who benefit from it, curdles into entitlement. The wedding was where all of it finally came due. Here's what I didn't know until I went looking. My name had at one point actually been on the guest list. Someone, Patricia, not Madison, had gone back and taken it off. Not an oversight, a decision. The stated reason, when I later pieced it together, through a cousin who wasn't good at keeping secrets, was that several guests attending were wealthy and socially prominent. And Patricia was afraid I might arrive in uniform, since I was scheduled to come directly from a base event beforehand. She told Madison, apparently without much hesitation, "People will ask questions. This day should be about you." What made that particular cruelty unbearable wasn't the snobbery. I'd absorbed plenty of that over the years and survived it. It was the timing. A portion of the very wedding I wasn't fit to attend was being paid for in part with money I had contributed. That night, after the phone call with Patricia ended, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled up the transfer records on my laptop. There was still one contribution toward the wedding costs that hadn't been dispersed yet. A final payment scheduled to go out that week. I didn't cancel anything I'd already committed to. I don't walk back a promise once it's made. That's not who I am, and being a person of my word matters more to me than being right in an argument. I didn't touch a cent of what had already gone out. I simply called the account manager handling the transfer and gave one clear instruction, the kind of directive I've given 100 times to people under my command. Do not authorize any additional payment from my personal funds without my written approval. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed, because tomorrow, whether I was on the guest list or not, was still going to be a wedding day. I want to be clear about something before I tell you about that wedding day. I never once considered ruining it. I know how these stories sometimes go. The dramatic phone call to the venue, the scene at the altar, the public humiliation delivered like a verdict. That was never who I was going to be. Madison was still whatever her mother had decided about me. Someone I'd cared about for 8 years. I wasn't going to make her wedding day about my anger. I was simply done making it about my money. Saturday morning, Ryan came downstairs already half-dressed in the tuxedo I'd seen hanging in the kitchen the night before. Snorts. He found me at the counter with a cup of coffee, dressed in sweatpants, clearly not preparing to go anywhere. He stopped in the doorway. "You're really going to make this about money?" I didn't look up right away. "No. I said your family made it about belonging." He exhaled through his nose, the sound he makes when he thinks I'm being unreasonable, but doesn't want to say so directly. He told me his mother was just old-fashioned, that this was a generational thing, that I was reading too much into one bad decision on one stressful week. I set my mug down. "If my mother told me you'd embarrassed her and banned you from my brother's wedding, would I go without you?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. We both already knew what the honest answer was, and the silence in that kitchen said it louder than anything either of us could have shouted. "That's what I needed to know," I told him. He left a few minutes later without saying goodbye. I heard the garage door close, then the car pull out of the driveway, and then the house went quiet in a way it hadn't been quiet in a long time. I didn't spend that day alone feeling sorry for myself. A few colleagues from my unit were hosting a small cookout that afternoon. Spouses and kids running around a backyard in Alexandria. Nothing fancy, just people who'd known me through deployments and promotion boards, and the kind of long nights that build real trust. Nobody there asked what my house was worth, or who I was related to. They asked how my week had gone, and whether I wanted another burger off the grill. It struck me, sitting in a folding chair with a paper plate on my knee, that these people who shared no blood with me at all, had made me feel more like family in one afternoon than the Lawson had in 8 years. Back at the wedding, from what I pieced together later, nothing dramatic happened. No confrontation, no scene, nothing that would make a good headline. What happened instead was smaller, and I think more honest. A vendor handling a last-minute upgrade to the floral arrangements needed confirmation of who was authorized to approve the additional cost. Ryan's name wasn't on that particular contract. Mine had been quietly for months. The vendor called Ryan directly when the payment didn't process the way it had for every other line item that year. He called me from what sounded like a hallway outside the reception, his voice tight and low so no one would overhear. "Is my name on the contract?" I asked him. There was a pause. "No, then it isn't my bill," I said. And that was the end of that conversation. There was one moment from that day I only learned about weeks later from Madison herself. And it's the kind of detail that tells you everything about how thin Patricia's version of respectability really was. Among the guests was Daniel Whitmore, Sr., the groom's father, a retired businessman who'd spent several years in the Army Reserve before building his company. At some point during the reception, he asked Ryan where his wife was, mentioning that Madison had told him I was an Army lieutenant colonel. Ryan apparently didn't have a good answer ready, but Daniel didn't move on the way Patricia always did. "Lieutenant colonel," he said, impressed. "That's not nothing." A couple of the other guests standing nearby, people whose opinions Patricia cared about a great deal, started asking questions too. What I did, how long I'd served, whether Ryan's wife might be at the next family gathering. Madison told me later that her mother had smiled through all of it, but it wasn't a real smile. It was the smile of a woman, realizing the thing she'd been ashamed of was, to everyone else in the room, something to admire. Ryan came home that night, still in his tuxedo tie, loosened, looking like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for hours. He wasn't angry about the wedding itself, or at least that wasn't what he led with. He set his phone down on the kitchen table, with more force than it needed. "Did you tell Mom you're not paying her expenses anymore?" "Yes," I said. "She may have to sell the house." I looked at him for a long moment, thinking about the mortgage payment that had cleared her account 8 days earlier, the payment she'd credited to him without correction. Then maybe I said she owns a house she can't afford. Ryan didn't let the conversation end there. Over the next 2 days, the accusation shifted shape until it landed on me directly. I had humiliated his family. I had embarrassed him in front of people who mattered to his career, to his mother's social circle, to the version of his life he'd spent years constructing. He said it enough times that I finally sat him down at the dining room table, with something more useful than an argument: a folder. I'd had Elaine put together a summary a few months earlier, mostly out of my own curiosity about our household finances. After a friend asked an offhand question about retirement planning. I hadn't looked at it closely since. Now I opened it in front of him and let the numbers speak instead of me. For 8 years, Ryan had told his family, and honestly told most of our friends, some version of "we're doing well." It wasn't a lie exactly. It just wasn't the whole truth. And the "we" was doing a lot of quiet, uncredited lifting. I want to be honest about where my financial stability actually came from, because none of it was some improbable windfall. It was a steady army income I'd never spent trying to impress anyone, more than a decade of disciplined saving, early investments that had simply been given time to grow, a modest inheritance from my father, and the proceeds from a condo I'd owned and sold before Ryan and I ever met. None of that made me wealthy in the way people picture wealth. It made me someone who lived comfortably within her means and had a cushion when the people around her didn't. Ryan, by contrast, spent close to what he earned, trying to maintain an image: the newer car, the country club dues. His mother expected him to help cover the wardrobe, the wedding gift that had to look a certain way in front of the right people. When I laid the folder open and walked him through what I'd actually paid toward his mother's mortgage, her insurance, her maintenance bills, and Madison's wedding over the past year alone, he went quiet in a way I hadn't seen from him before. Not defensive, just quiet, staring at a number that was larger than he'd let himself add up. "The money isn't the problem," I told him, and I meant it. I would have kept giving it gladly if it had ever been met with even a fraction of respect. The problem was that Ryan had known for years exactly how his mother felt about me, and he'd let me keep paying anyway. I asked him the question that had been sitting in my chest since the phone call with Patricia. "When your mother told you she was ashamed of me, what did you say?" He looked down at his hands. "I told her she was being difficult." "Did you tell her that if your wife wasn't welcome, neither were you?" He didn't answer that one at all. He didn't have to. The silence told me everything: that somewhere along the way, Ryan had decided it was easier to let his mother be wrong about me quietly than to correct her loudly. Because correcting her would have cost him something with her, and staying quiet only cost him something with me. And I had been easy to spend because I never made him choose. That night, I laid out exactly what was changing, calmly, the way I'd deliver any operational plan. Our accounts would be fully separated going forward. I would no longer subsidize Patricia in any form. Madison's expenses were no longer mine to cover. Ryan would be responsible for his own personal spending, and whatever we shared as a married couple would be split transparently based on what we each actually earned, not on what either of us wanted to appear to earn. He called it a punishment. I told him it had a simpler name: living within what we actually earn, I said. Patricia showed up at our house 2 days later unannounced, wearing the kind of composed outrage she usually reserved for service industry complaints. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask how I was doing after being cut from her daughter's wedding. She walked in and asked me to fix this. "Fix what?" I said, "Everything you stopped paying." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had spent 8 years making sure I understood I would never be quite good enough for her family, standing in my kitchen, asking me to keep funding a life she'd told everyone was entirely her son's doing. "Why would you accept money?" I asked her. "From someone you're ashamed to have at your daughter's wedding." She opened her mouth and nothing came out. For the first time in 8 years, Patricia Lawson didn't have a ready answer. And then, flustered, reaching for something, anything to regain her footing, she said the sentence that changed everything. "Ryan told us it was mostly his money anyway." I turned my head slowly and looked at my husband standing near the hallway, watching all the color drain out of his own face, like he'd just realized the folder on the table wasn't the only thing about to be opened that week. There's a particular kind of quiet that fills a room right after a lie finishes collapsing. Not shouting, not tears yet, just the sound of two people recalculating everything they thought they understood about each other. And a third person standing between them, realizing she's the one who's about to be handed the bill for it. I didn't raise my voice. I don't think I've raised my voice at Ryan more than a handful of times in 8 years, and this wasn't going to be one of them. I simply turned to him and repeated what his mother had just said slowly, so there could be no confusion about what I'd heard. Mostly your money. He tried to walk it back immediately the way people do, when they realize a door they thought was locked has just swung open in front of a room full of people. He said it wasn't exactly like that. He'd never explicitly claimed the mortgage payoff was his, that his mother had probably just assumed things over time, and he hadn't corrected her, because it wasn't worth the argument. Mom respects success, he finally said, like that explained anything. So you borrowed mine? I said. He didn't have a response to that either. I could see him working through the shape of what he'd actually done over the years. Not one dramatic lie, but 1,000 small missions, each one small enough to seem harmless on its own. Letting his mother assume the mortgage was his doing. Letting her believe the wedding contribution came from his account. Never once saying, in 8 years, actually that's Haley. He told himself, I think, that he was protecting his mother's pride, sparing her the discomfort of owing something to a daughter-in-law she looked down on. What he was actually doing was borrowing my success to build his own reputation brick by brick, inside a family that would never have respected me enough to give me credit directly. I just wanted her to be proud of me, he said quietly, and you let her be ashamed of me. I said so she could be proud of you. I didn't plan that sentence. It came out of me the way true things sometimes do, fully formed. And the moment I said it out loud, I understood it was the entire marriage compressed into a single line. Ryan didn't argue with it. He just stood there. And for the first time since I'd met him, I watched him look genuinely afraid of what I might say next. Patricia was still standing in my kitchen through all of this, and I watched something shift across her face, too. Not guilt exactly, not yet, but the early stages of a woman doing very fast, very uncomfortable math. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I simply walked to the drawer where I kept our financial records, pulled out the folder Elaine had prepared, and laid it open on the counter in front of her. The mortgage payoff. Source Haley Lawson. The insurance premiums from the spring. Source Haley Lawson. The wedding deposit from 4 months earlier. Source Haley Lawson. I didn't say a word while she read it. I let the paper do what 8 years of conversation never could. Patricia went very still. I think it was the first time in our entire relationship that she truly understood the soldier she hadn't wanted. Photographed at her daughter's wedding was the same woman who had kept a roof over her head. She didn't say anything for a long moment, and when she finally looked up at me, there was something in her expression I'd never seen directed at me before. Not warmth exactly, just the beginning of recognition. So, what do you want? She finally asked, and her voice had lost its usual edge. I think she expected me to ask for the house back. People who've spent their lives measuring worth and property tend to assume everyone else is playing the same game. Nothing, I said. She looked confused, like the word didn't fit the moment. I explained it to her plainly. The mortgage had been a gift finished the day I paid it, and I wasn't going to take it back. Not out of spite, not as leverage, not for any reason. That was never how I operated, and changing that now would only prove I'd been keeping score all along, which I hadn't. But everything going forward was hers to carry. The property taxes, the insurance, the utilities, the maintenance on a house that size, which apparently needed more of it every year. The house is yours, Patricia, I told her. So are the bills. I watched the reality of that settle over her slowly the way cold water does. She wasn't losing her home. Nobody was taking anything from her. She was simply, for the first time in a year, going to have to face what it actually cost to keep the life she'd built without someone quietly absorbing the difference behind her back. Her choices from there were entirely her own to make. She could scale back the life she was living. She could draw down retirement savings she'd probably rather keep untouched. Or she could sell a house that had become more simple than the shelter and move somewhere that matched what she could actually afford. Nobody was going to make that decision for her anymore. Ryan, for his part, kept circling back to the wrong problem entirely. Even after everything on that counter, even after his mother walked out of my kitchen without an apology, he was still fixated on one sentence. "You embarrassed me," he said. I looked at him and realized with a strange kind of calm that he still didn't understand what had actually happened in our marriage. I told him that if he wanted to save it, counseling wasn't optional anymore. He nodded, but I could see he was already retreating into the version of events where he was the injured party. That night, I packed one suitcase, not a dramatic exit, no slam doors, no scene for the neighbors to watch through their windows. Just clothes I'd need for a short stay in a corporate apartment near the base while I figured out what came next. Ryan stood in the bedroom doorway watching me fold shirts into a bag. "Are you leaving me?" he asked. I zipped the suitcase before I answered. "I'm leaving the version of this marriage," I said, "where I pay for the privilege of being disrespected. 6 months is enough time to find out what's actually true about a family once the money stops moving through it like a current holding everyone in place." Patricia sold the house in the fall. I want to be clear that it wasn't a fire sale, and it wasn't a tragedy either. No matter how she framed it to her friends at first, the market was decent. She got a fair price, and she used it to buy a smaller townhouse about 20 minutes away, bright, well-kept, with a little patio she now fills with flower pots, instead of the gardener she used to employ for the land lawn. I heard from Madison, who'd started reaching out to me on her own by then, that Patricia actually seemed lighter without the old house. Turns out maintaining the appearance of a life is its own kind of exhausting, and nobody had ever told her she was allowed to put it down. Madison and I talked for the first time in weeks over coffee a few towns over from where either of us lived neutral ground. She admitted she'd known her mother had pulled me from the guest list. She hadn't fought it not because she agreed with the decision, but because she didn't want to fight with her mother 4 days before her own wedding. "Then you made a choice, too," I told her, not cruel, just honestly. She didn't argue with that. I didn't cut her off permanently. She was still underneath everything someone I'd cared about for 8 years. But I told her plainly that whatever came next between us would have to be rebuilt, not simply resumed like nothing had happened. Ryan and I tried counseling for a few months, the way I'd asked him to that night in the kitchen. I went in with more hope than I let myself admit at the time. But it became clear fairly quickly that Patricia's approval had never been the whole problem. It was a symptom of something Ryan had built his entire sense of worth around, long before I ever entered the picture. He needed his family to see him as the successful one, the provider, the son who'd made it. And somewhere along the way, he'd decided that truth was less important than that image, even inside his own marriage. We separated in the spring, and the divorce that followed was about as peaceful as those things can be. No dramatic courtroom scene. No attempt on my part to take more than what was fair. Our assets were divided according to the law, and a settlement we both agreed to, without much conflict, because in the end neither of us wanted the fight. We wanted the truth to finally match the paperwork. I never set out to make Ryan poorer. I only wanted him to finally live inside the reality he'd actually earned, instead of the one I'd been quietly paying to maintain. Patricia called me in June. I almost didn't recognize her voice at first, because for the first time in 8 years, there was nothing performative in it. "I was wrong about you," she said. I didn't rush to forgive her. I let the sentence sit there and asked her gently what had changed. She told me she'd always assumed the military was a fallback for people who hadn't been given better options. Her words more or less dressed up, a little softer than she would have said them a year earlier. It wasn't until after everything fell apart that she actually looked into what my rank meant, what 20 years of a career like mine actually requires. She admitted she'd never once asked me a real question about my work in all the years she'd known me. "You didn't have to understand my career to respect me," I told her. It wasn't meant as forgiveness. It was meant as the truth offered plainly, the way I try to offer most things now. A year passed. I was given a new position of significant responsibility within my unit. The kind of assignment you spend a career working toward. At the change of responsibility ceremony, I stood among people who had known exactly who I was for a long time, not because of a house or a name or who I was related to, but because of the work itself. Nobody in that room asked what my house was worth. Nobody cared whose name was on which contract. What mattered to them was character, competence, and loyalty. The same three things the Lawson family had always demanded of me, and rarely, if ever, offered back. After the ceremony, my phone buzzed with a text. "Patricia, congratulations, Lieutenant Colonel Lawson." I looked at it for a long moment before I answered, not because I needed her approval anymore. I'd stopped needing that months earlier, somewhere between the folder on my kitchen counter and the suitcase I packed that night. But there was something almost peaceful in seeing her finally get the title right. I thought back, standing there in my uniform, surrounded by people who'd never once made me feel like an outsider to the night. Ryan told me his mother didn't want a soldier like me at the wedding. I remembered my answer, understood. He'd probably thought it meant I was giving in. What it actually meant was that I finally understood exactly where I stood in that family. And once I understood that I didn't need to shout, threaten, or punish anyone to change it, I simply stopped paying for the privilege of being treated like I didn't belong. Sometimes the loudest kind of revenge isn't taking something away from the people who hurt you. It's quietly refusing to keep giving them what was never truly theirs to begin with. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to know where it found you. Drop a comment and tell me what part hit hardest. And if you've ever had to set a boundary with people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. We share stories like Haley's every single day. So if you don't want to miss the next one, go ahead and subscribe. There's a lot more of this journey ahead, and I'd be glad to have you along for